Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your man, damednydc, the host of the Two Mics Up podcast. Back for season three, live from the DMV with a brand new episode. And man, look, I'm excited about today's guest. And just give me a second to kind of talk about, why I'm excited. So, the seasons have changed and we're moving into that fall season. It's a little nippy outside, got a little cool breeze in the air, and your drink game might have to change with the weather. Now, look, I know some of you, may not be into whiskey. Some of these finer tastes in life. I'm a green label guy, or I've kind of elevated myself a little bit to a little McKellen, 12 year, little something. But for those of you who may not even know, like, dang, what the hell are you even talking about? Whiskey? Like, I don't even know what's going on with whiskey and how do I pick or like how do I even get introduced? Well, today here, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to be introduced by today's guest, who I can't wait. I'm excited. I'm a fan. I follow. Uh, Look, I'm just going to stop. And you know what? Matter of fact, I'm going to make y'all wait because you know what? I want to say thank you to our platinum sponsors, who have been a big help with putting together today's show. Our friends over at TD3 Insurance, Bubbles and Brews Philly, Riddick Entertainment. We couldn't do this show without you guys, so thank you very much. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me bring into our studio today's guest, my main man, Chris. Chris, do me a favor. I'm gonna shut up now. I've been talking for about 2 minutes, man. I'm excited. Go ahead, introduce yourself to our guests. Let them know where you're from. Talk a little bit about the show, and I'm gonna be quiet. I'm gonna slide back.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So, as you heard, my name is Chris. I run the Whiskey Noobs Podcast. We're available on pretty much all major streaming platforms. Right now, it's just audio, no video, but I'm looking to the future to add something with some video. Uh, but I run a podcast all about whiskey, and it's all about getting started and getting into the hobby of drinking whiskey because I noticed it's pretty intimidating. It can be
Yeah,
intimidating to get into it.
yeah,
And so I try to bring a little something different than some of the other people who do bourbons or whiskeys, and I try to keep it a little bit lighthearted. I know a lot of people like to get very almost like tribal about the types of whiskey they like, the way they
right.
like to drink it, and I try to keep it lighthearted, tell some jokes, try some weird tricks and tips, and keep it fun while also learning about the hobby.
But and see, those are the things, ladies and gentlemen, that if you're listening and you get a chance to either listen or watch this episode, that's what I really liked about Chris in his podcast. Myself being a little bit more, I may have dived a little bit more into the whiskey game, but I enjoyed it. It's refreshing when you make it educational and fun. And Chris, could you just kind of talk about like really about yourself and where who are you and what is that all about that really led to the buildup of you starting the podcast?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm from Northeast Ohio. I went to college for engineering, and that's actually my day job. I'm a design engineer. Growing up, my dad was always very big into bourbon, very big into Jack Daniels too. And it kind of rubbed off on me as I got to the drinking age and started drinking. And I kind of wanted, like you had mentioned before, kind of the finer taste, kind of to enjoy it, and not just be drinking to get intoxicated or something like that.
Right.
So I got big into it, started with bourbon, and eventually went down the path of just all the whiskeys, Scotch and Irish and all the regions. And I wanted a podcast to listen to about it because I love podcasts.
Hmm.
And I was looking them up, and I couldn't really find any on like Spotify or anything. Spotify is my main streaming that I use for my personal listening, and I couldn't find any. And I had a little bit of a background with podcasts. I knew how to do it. And so I thought, why don't I just make one and make one for people who are trying to get into it,
Right.
and feel intimidated. And that's the name Noobs. It's like newbie, like when you're a gamer and you're
Right.
new. So I thought I'd kind of make it fun.
Hmm. And I really enjoy it. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have Chris share his information before we close today. But if you get a chance, and you just really want to just like he said, introduce yourself to whiskeys and things of that nature without really the purpose of not going to get drunk. But if you really want to
Right.
explore, and you really want to just, expand your taste buds and your taste and your palate of the various types, which we're going to get into today. Um, but before I even push further into that, so we know what the podcast is all about and where that love came from. But I hear you talk about your dad, and was that really the first inspiration that really inspired you? Because I say this not to be lightly, because I know for me in my home, and I want to be careful because I don't want people to think that I'm encouraging drinking, but drinking was okay in my home, within reason and bounds, and responsibly. So that was my curiosity as I got older. Um, Drinking is not an inspiration, but like because it was okay in my home, it made me feel okay. So what was it that inspired you outside of your dad, or maybe just that background that really made you want to continue doing that? Is that what really was the pushed you forward?
That's a great question. So I would say that culture in my household and with my dad is what got me into whiskey itself.
Hmm.
But what got me wanting to kind of spread the message of whiskey and talk with people about it and kind of try to build a community around it was actually the effect that the action has, not that the alcohol
Mm,
has on you.
mm,
But I got into cigars as well before whiskey, actually.
mhm.
And that meditative effect that you get where you're pausing your day and
Right.
saying, I'm going to focus all of my brain power on this masterpiece that somebody spent years making. That's what I enjoy the most about it. Some people like to observe artwork and
Yeah.
paintings,
Right.
and this is a form of art, and I love sitting back and observing that.
That's, man, you touched on a couple other points, because that's really my where whiskey kind of came in for me as well. Like I said, in my background, it was okay, it was in my home, but when I became of age, cigars, the love of cigars, and then matching them with a whiskey, uh, really, like you said, and I never thought it in the way that you said as an art form, but there's a deep appreciation of the work and the craftsmanship that actually went into or goes into creating those cigars. And then when you really start delving into, your whiskey, there's an art there as well. And I'm just so amazed. And I want to throw this out there for a lot of people. You know, can you give us a brief description maybe on, how whiskey is produced and made, and what's the process? Because I think a lot of us don't really understand what goes into that, other than just picking the bottle up off the shelf.
Right. And it's an in-depth process. And there's so many variables. And that's when you really start to realize how much of an art form it is because of all the variables that go into it. So any whiskey is going to start similar to how a beer or a wine would start, with a mash bill. And so they're going to put different grains and cereals. Depending on the type of whiskey, you'll have different grains going into it, and they're going to ferment them. And
Mm,
that's going to make it into alcohol, but it's going to be weak alcohol. So then once you ferment all of that, this is just a general overview, but once you ferment all of that, then you distill it in a still. And so it's essentially boiling and making a vapor, going up a tube, and then coming down and dripping out as a much stronger alcohol, just like distilling water. But they're distilling this fermented mash. Then once it's done distilling, it's actually completely clear, which a lot of people don't realize. And so it doesn't get color until later in the process when you add it to a barrel and you age it. In some whiskeys, you can add artificial coloring as well, but like bourbon, for example, you can't. And so all that color is coming from the barrel, from aging. And you can
wow.
age all sorts of different ways as well, which gives super different flavor profiles as well.
So again, this is what I love about this show. I did not know that. So an oak barrel, let's say, versus, I don't know, a cherry barrel, will give you different color, or like that gleam that you see in the bottle. And then the years of aging also will just, give you that distinct color and look.
Yes, absolutely. So like bourbon has to be like brand new charred oak barrels, but a lot of whiskeys, especially Scotches and Irish, they'll use used barrels. So maybe it used to have bourbon in it, or it used to have sherry in it, and it's empty now. All that's emptied out
Hmm.
of there.
Hmm.
But you're using that barrel and it's still soaked into there, and it gives it a ton of different flavors, different, a little bit of a different look,
Hmm.
different. And the age is a huge indicator on how dark the whiskey is. The darkness of the whiskey can indicate the age, depending on if you can use artificial coloring. There can be some trickery there in marketing.
Right.
But yeah, it has a huge impact on what the whiskey looks like.
See, I never, like I said, I'm blown away just by hearing that. So I didn't know. So even let's just talk about real quick when you speak of age or the aging process. Um, like I was just sitting here, so I'm a green label guy. I'm a fan of the green label. I don't know why. To me, it tastes smoother than your regular or even the red. The gold obviously is a premium type of flavor, but none of us is walking around with money like that on the regular. Uh, but the McKellen as well, another fine, 12 year. So like when I look at the two, and like you said, I'm looking at the two, and I'm looking at the color that kind of between the two, and they're both. So one is a blended, and they're both Scotch, and one is both single malts. One is a blended malt. So I'm going to just jump into it. I never paid attention really now that I'm reading it. The difference between a single blend and a blended malt whiskey.
So a single malt Scotch, there are specific rules that you have to follow,
Mm,
and it's going to just use malted barley. So
okay.
that's going to be your grain that goes
Okay.
into it, and that's where it gets the malt name from it. The single in the name actually is a common misconception that it is a single barley, which it is, but that's not where the single comes from. The single actually comes from a single distillery. So you can also have a single grain whiskey, where it's a grain whiskey. It's not,
Ah,
it uses multiple different grains, but it's at a single distillery. You'll
gotcha.
also see that with Irish, there'll be single pot still versus just pot still whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then a blended Scotch is going to have, and it could still just be just malt. It could just be malted barley. Off the top of my head, I know Monkey Shoulder just uses three different single malts, and then it blends them together. And you have someone who that's their job is they actually find a good way to blend these different Scotches together in different ratios and what's going to give
Oh,
you a complex flavor profile. And so
uh,
that's the difference there.
and see, you just said the word that I was going to. So does that lead into the complex flavor profiles that we hear about? Uh, and or when I say hear about, or if you get into this and you really start reading about the different manufacturers and blends, can you just simplify what that means to those of us? Because I'm familiar because I've read about, but could you simplify what that complex profile means, like in a nutshell?
Yeah. A lot goes into the profile that a whiskey has. So you've got usually you're going to review it in three parts. You're going to have a nose, a palate, and a finish. So
Hmm.
you're going to smell it, get the aroma, what kind of different notes you smell, different flavors. Maybe it's sweet, maybe it's bitter. And then a similar thing is going to happen with the palate, where it's in your mouth, and that's when you're tasting the palate.
Hmm.
And then after you swallow, you're going to have a finish, and that's also going to change with a good complex whiskey. Maybe different flavors come out during the finish. Maybe
Hmm.
some get stronger or weaker, and maybe it leaves a different feeling in your mouth, like a dry feel or an oily feel. And
Right.
all of that plays into it, and all of that is impacted by your day-to-day life, if what you ate beforehand and what time of day it is. So I say this on the show a lot too. A whiskey's profile is not just what you tasted that one time that you had it. If you want to know a whole whiskey's profile, then you have to try it multiple different
Time.
times, multiple different palates. I'm sure, like with the green label, you've come back to it before and been like, "Did it taste like it?
Tastes like
Did
this,
it taste
right?
like that last time?"
Right. It's true, and that's why I
Yep.
wanted to share that because I've had people say, I don't like this, right? And then you have friends, they'll come back months later and total different thing. You might have something totally different to eat, and just by chance, I'll pour a drink and give it to him again, or give him a little sifter. Man, this is good. I was like, well, last time you here, you said you didn't like it, and that's what I just really want people to hear when you talk about these complex flavor profiles. They are different, and I think it's key. A lot of times, we don't pay attention when you go to places that when a lot of times, if you're taste testing, they give you things to cleanse your palate to eat and as such to be able to go ahead and taste something again because it really can be impacted by what you had or if you had a cigar or a cigarette or what you ate or whatever it may be can really impact that flavor that you're getting each and every time.
Majorly, it can have a
Mhm.
huge impact. The analogy that I like to use is like having a glass of a whiskey is like seeing one piece of the puzzle, and the
Mm.
puzzle is that whiskey's profile. But when you're
Hmm.
having a glass of it at 5 p.m. after you ate something for dinner, you're
Right.
seeing one piece of that puzzle.
Very, very awesome, man. I appreciate you taking time to share that with us and educate me and our listeners on that. So, before we get into the next set of questions, I just want to take a second to jump in and thank, you know, our friends over at TD3 Insurance, Riddick Entertainment, Bubbles and Bruce Philly, our platinum sponsors for continuing to support Two Mics Up. And like we always do here, we like to support small businesses. TD3 Insurance Agency protects and covers all your insurance needs from auto, home, renters, commercial, specialty, and life insurance. TD3 is licensed in the DMV, North Carolina, and New York, and a brand new office just opened at 3985 Prince William Parkway, Suite 206. Head over there and give my man Cliff a shout out, yo. He'll take care of you. Tell him Two Mics Up sent you. Riddick Entertainment. I mean, what else can I say? Riddick Entertainment is a multifaceted event management firm based in Northern Virginia. Riddick Entertainment's detailed creativity and precision will give you a truly meaningful and memorable experience. Contact Riddick Entertainment at info@riddickent.com. And, last but not least, Bubbles and Bruce Philly. If you guys have family that live in the Northern Philly, Delaware area, reach out to these folks. They have an amazing vintage mobile prosecco and craft beer bar. It's nothing that you've ever seen before. They provide unforgettable events. Contact our friends at Bubbles and Brews Philly at getcozybars.com. And we're back today, ladies and gentlemen, with our amazing guest, Chris. And I want to make sure I say your name, Chapanar.
Correct.
Yes, my good friend Chris Chapanar. He is the host of the Whiskey Noobs Podcast, and he's sitting here, man. He's just chopping it up with us today, educating us about whiskey, about the flavors, the palate, everything that you want to know on how to get introduced to. Chris, I have to ask. I've been, like I said, I've had the pleasure of kind of dipping into the game, but and tell me if I'm right or wrong. To my understanding, there's five types of whiskey, and if you could, just take a few moments and break those down for our audience if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So the five most common types that you're going to hear people talk about, they're broken up by region, and that's how whiskey often gets broken up, is by region and by country. So the five most common types that you're going to have are going to be American, and the most common American that most people know is bourbon, which is a
Mhm.
specific type. And then you also have Scotch, you have Irish, you have Canadian, and you have Japanese.
Hmm.
And we're fortunate enough to live in a time where it seems like there might be some more types kind of up and coming.
Really?
And it seems like it's the time for craft whiskey right now. And
Really?
people are really branching out and trying new things. But
Hmm.
the five main that you're going to hear a lot of people talk about are those five.
Okay, so now you piqued my interest. So we're going to veer off for a second. So craft whiskey, like,
Oh,
so
yeah.
what, man? Ed, talk to me, man. Talk to me, brother. What is behind the craft, whiskeys?
Yeah. So we're getting into a really neat time where it used to be like this region made this,
Hmm. Hmm.
and we're starting to get into where different regions are trying other regions' recipes. Now, the best example I can give for you, I just had it, I think a month ago for the first time. It's a Texas single malt.
Hmm.
I forget the name of the company that makes it. I want to say like Balcones or something like that.
Okay.
But they actually make a single malt similar to how an average single malt Scotch is made, but it's
Hmm.
in Texas. And so usually if you're in America, you're going to be making a bourbon recipe, maybe a rye recipe. But we're getting into where now we're making single malts in America, and it's kind of
What?
exciting.
Man, look, I'm sitting there, I'm scratching my head like that, and I don't know. People might be looking like, "Hey, why are you excited?" I'm like, because this is a change where you're starting. I mean, craft, because it takes me back to when I was a little bit younger, when micro brews and craft beers just kind of seemed to pop up all over the place, and really, for me, at one point, became more of the norm than your traditional beers. So for me, when I hear craft whiskey, I'm like, well, where can I find this at a because like where I live, here in Northern Virginia. So our we have what they call like the VABC, and the one that I normally go to. So like before the pandemic, like Tuesday nights, and I want to say it was Thursday nights, they would have all of these new vendors coming through, letting you taste test. And I found some really great uh brands and things that I probably would have never have bought. And so, like I said, when I hear this type of thing, I'm like, well, maybe this will be the future. You know, Lord willing, fingers, toes crossed, we get out of this pandemic, that we can go out and taste these things and find out more about these crafts that are going on. I mean, that's awesome. I'm excited. And I know you have to, like I say, you don't do it to get drunk, but like, I can only imagine, what is your podcast like off air or behind scenes? Would you, with you and your buddies? Because I've seen and heard some. You have any funny stories that you can share, about behind scenes?
Yeah. Well, the most common I could say is it almost always, you're drinking a whiskey and you're comparing to other whiskeys. In
Uh-huh.
about every episode, if I have a guest on, we're after the podcast, it's like, hey, can I try that one? Do you have it on your shelf downstairs? But we do a lot of comparing. And so my last guest that I had on, I tried to pour as little as I could, but we tried 5 different whiskeys because there's a whole
Oh
episode
wow.
about finding your palate and finding out what you're
Okay.
going to like.
Okay.
And so we tried 5 different whiskeys, and it's the conversation breaks down a little bit, that's for sure, and gets a little bit more lighthearted and joking. And that's what I like about it. That's what gives it the community feel,
Right. I love it. So speaking of that, uh, can you share with us? So, how does bourbon differ from whiskey?
That's a great question. I actually had somebody just comment on TikTok about this as well. So bourbon is a subset of whiskey, specifically of American whiskey, and
Okay.
it has its own very specific rules. Now, I'm not going to go over all of them because there's some that are super specific, like the proof when it goes into the barrel and things like
Hmm.
that. But the biggest things that are important to note, so with Scotch and Irish, you have a lot of barley. With
Hmm.
bourbon, it has to be at least 50% corn in the mash bill that I talked about where they're fermenting it. And
Okay.
so that is going to give a very distinct sweet flavor to it that corn has when it ages for a while.
Hmm.
And then a couple of the other big ones are that it has to be brand new charred oak, white oak barrels, which kind of it makes you have to be a little bit more competitive with the way you craft it because you can't use different types of barrels, wine barrels, sherry barrels to get those flavors. And then the other thing is that it cannot be artificially colored at all. You can't add any kind of a caramel coloring to it, which also adds an element to it because now the darkness of your whiskey is pretty much telling the story as to whether it was aged or whether it was watered down. That's another thing that the color can indicate. If you added distilled water to cut it down in proof, you're going to
Hmm.
get that idea based on the color of it. So bourbon has some pretty strict rules, which is, I think, what makes it so popular.
Oh, see, man, look, again, yeah, y'all hearing it today, ladies and gentlemen. This man, he's really educating. I again didn't know. It's a whole lot that really goes in, these processes that we really enjoy. Um, I really didn't have to ask, with all of that information, and for those who are maybe interested in, putting their toe in the pool. I don't want to throw anybody out in the deep end yet. If there were, or I shouldn't say if there were, can you, based on your experience, maybe share 1 or 2 brands or types, whether it be Scotch or bourbon or both, that maybe a beginner should, take a minute to invest in and give a try?
Absolutely, yeah. My most common answer to that question, and I get it a lot on TikTok as well, is to try multiple different kinds. That's the important thing, especially
Mm,
if you're going to buy 3 bottles, don't buy 3 bourbons.
mm,
I like to say to try multiple different kinds because everybody has a very different palate. I have one buddy I have on the show a lot. He just likes Scotch. And then my
mm.
other, probably second most common guest, he just likes bourbon. So
Oh,
I like to say to try at least if you're gonna pick 3, at least do bourbon, Irish, and Scotch because those cover a really wide spectrum.
hmm,
And then
hmm.
if I had to recommend specific brands, I'm really into Four Roses bourbon. I really like it. I actually have right here the Four Roses. This is their single barrel, and I
Okay.
really enjoy it.
Hmm,
And I find that bourbon usually is the most welcoming to somebody trying to get into the hobby.
hmm.
So that's a really good beginner whiskey. And then another one for Scotch I like is Glenmorangie, which I also have Glenmorangie, Glenmorangie, Glenmorangie. I've heard it pronounced a whole bunch of ways.
Yeah.
They're 10-year. It's another one that's not super expensive, not going to break the bank, and it'll give you a good idea of what that tastes like. But I would hate for somebody to just try one and say they don't like whiskey, because there are whiskeys that I don't like, and I drink a lot of them. So you don't want to just limit yourself.
No, and that's true, and I think too what you just said, and what I found over the years. So again, getting older, I think my taste you acquire a taste for things, right? But you brought up a very good point too. Like I don't want people, and tell me if I'm wrong. I don't really think people should a lot of times estimate a dollar value with a better brand or level of, because I mean, yes, there are some that definitely worth that price point, but you don't have to break your bank to enjoy a decent bourbon or scotch when you're starting in this, correct?
Correct. And I would argue that you shouldn't.
Mm,
I actually, this is the reason for my first episode. We drank a $15 whiskey on my first episode of the
mm,
show, because there's a couple reasons. First of all, you may not like it, and that could
right,
be a waste of money.
right.
Second of all, if you're going to spend, let's just throw a number out, like $50 on
Hmm.
whiskey, you'd be better off getting three inexpensive ones than getting one $50
Right.
whiskey.
Good
And then
point.
the last reason that's really important is, if you're just getting into it, you're probably not super accustomed to tasting and really calling out those complex notes, those hidden notes. You
Hmm.
know, when you get more expensive, you're getting a more complex palate that's going to change flavors throughout the tasting.
Hmm.
And if you're newer to it, you're probably not going to be able to experience that. And so you might not understand why it's expensive. And then
Hmm.
you're going to try the expensive one and you're going to say, well, I didn't like the expensive one, so why would I like a cheap one? And so I always tell
Good
people,
point.
start at the middle shelf maximum. Don't start on the top shelf. And if you have to, start on the bottom shelf, which is
Yeah,
what I did.
yeah. Work your
I
way up.
really like some inexpensive ones. Right off the bat, Rebel Bourbon is like $15, at least in
Yeah,
Ohio.
right.
We have state mandated pricing or whatever,
Hmm.
state liquor stores, but it's $15 near me, and if it's a really great way to see if you're going to have a chance at liking bourbon. But once again, you might like scotch, so you don't want to limit yourself.
And that's very true. Because I bring that up because I started that way myself. And just really more playing around because, like I said, the cigar, I think the love of cigars really helped that love of scotch and bourbon. For me, I like Cohibas, black, or I like the blue. Two distinct different flavors, even a cigar. And I find that even with that cigar, sometimes I find that there's certain scotch or whiskey that I prefer with each cigar on its own. Because again, that flavor palette and that taste, I look for that familiar taste that that goes with each. So, but I did start, like you said, starting lower and building my way up and educating myself. I think is a great way. And like you said, why waste your money? Like, don't do it. Yeah, no,
Exactly. You know, if I buy a $15 bottle and I learn that I like scotch, throw away the $15 bottle, you know?
right, right. Not the $50 bottle, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, this was, man, Chris, I really appreciate you taking time out today and joining us because this was so educational. It was really fun. I'm excited. I hope our listeners and our audience is excited uh, to really join in on a new venture. Like I said, it's getting cold outside. The holidays are coming. But I do want before I go, I do have one. I like to ask an offbeat question, if you will. So for me, like I believe every man or woman needs like an animal sidekick. For me, I'm a Taurus by nature, so my animal sidekick is a bull. Just by nature, it's just natural for me. So if you could have an animal sidekick, what animal would yours be and why?
That's a good question. Okay. I want to start by saying, hey, thanks for having me on the show, too. I love what you guys are doing. I love the positivity that you're spreading. I mean, it's so important. It's so important to be positive and to spread that. But
Thank
to
you.
to get to your question, maybe I'm beating around the bush a little bit. When I was a kid, I read a book where it's super far fetched, but a kid went out and lived in the woods, and he actually got a falcon, and he like
Oh,
trained it, and it was like
okay.
his falcon.
Uh huh.
And I always thought that was super cool when you'd have like a pirate and like their parrot or whatever would swoop in and land on their hand. And
Right.
so that would probably have to be my pick, because it could fly away, take a message, or scope something out and come back. That'd be super
I
cool.
love it. Man, I love it, man. Hey, look, Chris, thank you so much, man. Like, and thank you for your kind words. We are really here, and that's what our platform is all about. Educating, empowering, impacting our communities. Locally and abroad. Today you're our first guest that I can recall officially from Ohio, the state of Ohio. So thank you for opening up new doors for us in Ohio, prayerfully. Um, and we do want to just spread a positive message. So before we even go any further, I want to allow you a few minutes, take as much time as you need, share your information where our audience and our listeners can go see you, follow you, support you and everything that you're doing. Cause I enjoy it. I hope, and I'm sure everyone else will enjoy it. So take a few minutes, Chris.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So my podcast is available on almost all major streaming platforms, your Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of that. And if you just look up Whiskey Noobs, it'll come up. I have an Instagram. It's whiskey_noobs. And from there in my bio, I do have a link tree where you can find all the links to everything that's important. You can also reach out via email and get on the email list that I have for the show. If you just send an email to whiskeynoobspodcast@gmail.com, and you can join the email list, and it actually goes back to your point about what whiskeys do you try first. Because the email list is all about guiding my listeners with the different whiskeys I'm going to have on the show and allowing them the chance to try them as we go through the show. Last but not least is my TikTok. I have been on TikTok. It's a lot more lighthearted than the show. I like to tell jokes and try to just spread more positivity like we talked about. And you can find me on TikTok at Whiskey Noobs Podcast. An important note is that I do spell whiskey Whiskey. It can be spelled with no E, depending on your region. I
Hmm.
spell it with the E. So that'll help with finding the show. Let me look at my list of social medias, but yeah, that's all that I've got. We've got exciting stuff coming up. Been doing Q&As with the listeners, allowing people the chance to ask questions through Instagram and through TikTok, and so it's going to be some pretty exciting things coming in the next couple months.
Hey, look, well, I'm going to continue to follow. I'm going to continue to watch. Ladies and gentlemen, look, if you, like I said, you have to take some time out, follow this gentleman. I think he's doing amazing work. I love his energy. I love his show. Learn, share with a friend, bring a friend, tune in, support. That's what we're all about here on Two Mics Up. Chris, again, thank you so much, my friend, for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, we're going to continue to move forward. Season 3, all brand new stuff. You want to make sure that you don't miss. Yeah, thank you, Chris. You don't want to miss what we have coming up next week. I'm going to be quiet. Y'all just stay tuned. Uh, if you're watching, make sure you go ahead and you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go down there and hit that little bell down at the bottom so that you can be notified of all the new things from Two Mics Up. While you at it, give us a thumbs up, give us a thumbs down. Tell us how you feel. Leave us a comment. We really want to know. We want to make sure that we're bringing you the best content, the best guests, and just giving you the best that we can each and every week. And like we do as we close out each and every show, stay safe, stay blessed. Mike's out.